All right, what is up, everybody? This is Destination the Show, episode 57. We are recording on the evening of Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm good. I feel like not a lot has happened in the baseball world since we last talked. That's relevant to the Twins anyway.
Nope.
So yeah, how about you? How are you doing?
Dude, I'm fine. I'm not really loving this World Series overall. I'm getting to the stage of the offseason where I'm like a little, it's not the offseason yet, but I'm a little sad. There's no minor league stuff to talk about. There's no draft stuff really to talk about. So
It's like
I'm really excited.
a month and change until the draft lottery. I think that's the next fun thing, right?
That is the next fun thing. Looking forward to it, but I'm super looking forward to this conversation because we have an awesome guest with us this evening. Actually, one of our first ever return guests. We are really excited to welcome back to the show for the second time, pitching coach in the Twins organization for the Cedar Rapids Kernels during the 2024 season, and that is Jonas Lovin. Jonas, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
I'm good, guys. I'm good. Enjoying the off season, like you said. Not a lot happening in Twins world right now, but enjoying the World Series. But thank you guys for having me on. Thanks for having me back, and it's been fun to follow your guys' content throughout the year. So thanks for all the coverage and everything.
We appreciate that. Absolutely. All right, so we're gonna jump into some questions here in just a second, but we'll probably start with some high level stuff, then dig into we gotta dig into a lot of pitchers, Jonas, because I feel like you guys have had an unbelievable year. So we'll cover some of we'll call them your graduates, or your guys who you spent a little bit of time with this year, and then maybe finish on some of the guys that kind of rose up to Cedar Rapids at the end of the season. So, Jeremy, you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I feel like we should get right into the thick part of it and start talking a little Big Ten football.
Yeah.
I feel like I understand you're a Nebraska football guy. Is that right?
Unfortunately, I am. Yeah.
So how do we feel? How do we feel about Nebraska football? How confident? How optimistic are you about that team?
And I was feeling really good going into the Indiana game.
Okay.
And then not so much after that, but we looked a lot better last week. I wasn't expecting much last week. And last year we were 5-3 at this same point last year, and we lost the last 4 games. So if we could find a way to win one and be bowl eligible, I'd feel okay. If we could find a way to finish 7-5, I think I feel pretty dang good about that.
So the one question I have to ask about Nebraska football, because I don't watch a lot of Nebraska football. I see like highlights and pregame stuff.
You're not missing a lot.
Is the quarterback is he trying to be Patrick Mahomes? Is that his whole like thing?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a lookalike thing right away, and then I think he just ran with it and has embellished it a bit. And he does look like Patrick Mahomes, and he does have some mannerisms that are similar, but I do think some of it is intentional. And the play will speak for itself. He's obviously not Patrick Mahomes, but
absolutely.
You are talking about being sad about football, Jonas, but we're both Wisconsin guys, and it has been a dark few years. And I actually feel like this Wisconsin-Nebraska game that is coming up in a few weeks here, it's actually going to be big for both programs. Feels like a fairly important hurdle to beat a competent team, as opposed to just knocking over the easy ones, which Wisconsin has not been able to do recently. So.
No, for sure. I was upset when we didn't get Fickle. I really wanted Fickle, but Rule's done a nice job, and I've been impressed. So, yeah, that'll be a big one. Wisconsin and Iowa will be big ones for us.
How do you feel? This is off script. How do you feel about Nebraska basketball?
Honestly, better than I have the last couple of years. They had a nice year last year in relative terms to their standards. And it sounds like they have some good, high quality transfers coming in, which everybody says. So I guess we'll see what that looks like. Well, I feel pretty good about it, considering it is Nebraska basketball.
Well, the reason I ask is because right now Wisconsin is they're doing like their tour where they play the WIAC teams, which is the D3 league in Wisconsin. So they play one of each of those teams every year, and they're playing my alma mater right now, who's obviously D3 school, and
struggling,
barely beating them. So This is not great for Badger basketball.
Hey, we know actually Nebraska is a volleyball school, if we're being real now.
Without a doubt.
And proudly so. Okay, so let's move on to baseball. Jonas, you're gonna have to remind me if this was your second or third year at Cedar Rapids. I want to say it was your second, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Second year in CR and second year with the Twins.
Okay, how was it different for you from your first? And then I'm curious, like, has your approach as a pitching coach evolved or changed, from year one to year two with the Twins organization? And then curious in what ways, if at all?
Yeah. I think year one to year two, the biggest difference is people, right? So you go into year two and you go to spring training and guys that you had last year and what they've been working on and you've worked through a lot of those things with them. So their progress and their frustrations and when you come in that first year, you don't know any of that. You ask around and you try to get as much knowledge as you can, but you're still kind of flying blind for a bit. So year two, you're definitely more comfortable because of that. And you feel, I guess I felt more confident in, making decisions or suggesting changes to players or whatever it was. Because I had been with them for a while and kind of knew their successes and their struggles and how they felt about stuff. So I would say that's the biggest difference. And then, as far as coaching, I think the approach is mainly the same. But I think this year, the value of the relationships with the players really stood out to me. And maybe that is connected with coming back for year two and having some of the same guys. But your ability to connect with the guys and get a message across so that they comprehend it, so that they believe in it, which is a big piece for some of these pro guys, is really important. And it was a piece that, not that I was neglecting ever in the past, I don't think, but was a piece that really stood out to me this year and seemed to open my eyes a little bit. There were several moments that I can think of that were, hey, that this message is coming across much better because of your relationship with this guy or because of your past experience with this guy than maybe it would have with another guy or maybe than it would have in the past. But I say that's probably the biggest, it's maybe not a philosophical change, but just something that I've noticed, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And a follow-up there, if I can, I'm curious, do you find it easy to suss out right away? Let's say you're working with a anonymous pitching prospect who you've never worked with before. Is it easy to figure out whether they're kind of geared in towards analytics, the things that you're offering, or are more kind of grounded in their own routine? Like, do you pick up on those things quickly as a pitching coach, or is it a little hard to suss out? Or I guess maybe it kind of depends on the guy and it varies from pitcher to pitcher.
It definitely varies, but I think you can get a feel for it right away. Some of it's in how they receive a messaging immediately. If they're very outspoken in some of those early meetings, which is fine. It's their careers. They should, own some of those pieces. But, there are guys that will sit in those very first meetings that will nod their heads and everything is, yep, well, sounds good. Let's do that. And there are guys that have their own suggestions. And then there's guys in the middle that will say yes, but also have questions. And I think those guys are ultimately the guys that you want to coach the most, right? Because they feel like they're in the right mindset to receive some coaching. Mm-hmm. So you can see it a little bit right away, but you definitely get it more as you go, right? You might think a guy is one way, but that they struggle a little bit, or you find something that clicks for them, and that relationship piece again comes about, and they trust you a little bit more, and then they're maybe a little bit more willing to change. But a lot of those guys we get are guys that maybe were with other orgs. And so maybe they have some, burned bridges, or maybe they have some things in the past where they don't trust coaches right away, or they don't trust the org right away, which is totally fine. And that's, like I said, it's their careers. So yeah, as you develop that trust, I think it changes as it goes, but you can feel it a little bit right away.
Yeah, makes sense. So one other thing I was curious to ask you about, and this is certainly true just from like people who are outside of baseball who try to keep up with player development in like a decently detailed way like we do, right? So it always seems to me that pitching development is moving kind of at the speed of light. Changes in what the latest thing is that organizations are emphasizing or leaning on, particular pitches kind of coming and going in terms of being trends. Curious for your read on what's different, if anything, between now and kind of 12 months ago when we last spoke. And then what do you think the kind of next frontier is, or what's your prediction of the next kind of trend in pitching development in the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, pitching development is interesting because it kind of follows the hitters, right? And I think you would say the same for hitters. It kind of follows the pitchers. So as you've seen, I don't want to say a couple years ago, but a few years ago, the north-south, pitch at the top of the zone with the banger curveball was a very common approach, and an approach that a lot of teams drafted to and developed toward. And then as that became more prevalent, you saw guys be able to get to the ball at the top of the zone a bit better, specifically guys with some, flatter swings. And so then you've seen the sinker come back a bit more. You've seen the sweeper, a more lateral breaking pitch, come about. So I guess I don't know what's on the frontier. I think it's just adjusting as the hitters adjust. And now I think you've seen a little bit of it already with, the sweeper was a massive pitch for a lot of orgs last year. And I know us as an org at least dialed it back a bit, or at least figured out, what the sweeper was a good fit for, and which arsenals it fit best with, so that the players could get the best results on the field instead of forcing guys maybe to throw it, or, just having a better understanding of that. So yeah, I think as we move, it's just having a better understanding of arsenals for guys, what fits for each guy, because I think those trends come about and everybody wants to jump on it because it does seem like a quick fix or something that, hey, we're not on this. If we're on this, maybe we're a lot better. And you try it, and sometimes it works, and we've had guys hit on certain things like that, the sweeper and other things. But I guess I'm not sure what's necessarily on the frontier. I do think I'm a big believer in two fastballs. I do think two fastballs specifically for starters is a big piece, whether you're a north-south guy or not. You do see most of your big league starters are north-south guys, but I still think there is some value to having that sinker specifically for same-handed hitters. So I think we'll see as we go here, but that's something that I guess I've always believed in and have seen it rear its head a little bit more.
Love it. You're teeing us up for questions about specific guys later, I think, including one of Jeremy's favorites. Sounds good.
Before we get there, though, Cedar Rapids wasn't as good in the win-loss record in 2020 than they were in 2023. And overall, I think all the affiliates were kind of down compared to most Twins affiliates. You're looking at playoff runs. But the flip side of that was when you talk about specific prospects, it's almost like all of the prospects that we focus on had better years last year than maybe the year before, or whatever prospect arrow up, right, when we talk about these guys. So how do you balance the winning part versus the player development part when you evaluate your past season?
Yeah, I think you do, you focus on the player development part, right? So we started with a lot of guys that were in CR the year before, specifically on the pitching side. And not saying there were plenty of hitters that we got better, but speaking from first-hand experience on the pitching side, we started with a lot of guys that were in CR the year before, and they, had some success and were able to move up. And I think that speaks to their work in the offseason, their development in the offseason, and then obviously coming back and some adjustments that they made that we, learned from their time there the year before. So I think the player development piece, when you see those guys move up so quickly, you really mark that as a massive success. Having Zebby Matthews make his big league debut, massive success. Andrew Morris moving up quickly. Corey having a great year in AA after he came back. CJ having a nice year after he came back healthy. So, those player development pieces are always the thing that I think we hang our hat on. The winning pieces, obviously, you want your guys to pitch in competitive games and be able to develop a little bit of that winning edge. But, there's just some pieces that are out of your control, right? Like if you look at from the minor league perspective, we traded a lot of the 2021 draft class. So a lot of our, upper level minor leagues, those guys are gone. We traded them for big leaguers. So we're We're maybe having guys in the 22 class up there before they're ready, or whatever it may be. But a lot of those guys that would maybe be there, your Sawyer Gibson Longs, your Casey Legamin, some of the guys that are pitching in the big leagues aren't in those spots right now. So definitely try to focus on the development piece. But
okay, well, you've segued us nicely into digging into your I'm going to call them your graduates, Jonas, because you had a couple of these guys for a little chunk of 2024, and then two of the others it feels relevant to touch on too. And like these four guys, I think most Twins fans tend to cluster together, right? Because they're all part of the same draft class, 2022. And I think it's fair to say, even from a slightly homer perspective, that like a remarkable level of success achieved as a quartet, given you look at the draft slots, right? So we'll start with Zebby Matthews, and maybe I'm like teeing you up for a rhetorical question here, right? But he started in high A. Could you have possibly seen the season that he put together, just absolutely crushing everything that was put in front of him in the minor leagues in 2024? And then on the flip side, obviously, the adjustment to the majors is tough. It's difficult for any pitcher to make that leap. What do you think's next in terms of areas of focus for him in order to help him thrive a little bit more at that level as we look towards 2025?
Yeah, I think if anybody says they saw that coming, they're lying to you. I've always believed that Zebby was a big leaguer, just from having that relationship with him, knowing his work ethic. There are a few guys in our org that work harder than that guy. So knowing that he was going to do basically whatever it took to solve the problems that were going to present themselves to get to the big leagues, I didn't think it would happen this fast, but I did see that part coming for him. Now, there was some flashes in spring training. We made some adjustments to his slider. He had a couple outings in spring training where you could see that the slider was going to maybe be a difference maker for him. We didn't know because it's spring training. You never know. And then early on, after about 3 outings, it was pretty clear, like, all right, we got to get this guy. We got to get this guy out of here. And then, I thought he would do well in Double-A. Did I think he was going to be the best pitcher in minor league baseball in Double-A? No, I didn't think that was going to happen. And then obviously he gets called up to Triple-A and he's there for a short time with, some injuries and ends up getting called up to the big leagues. So yeah, I don't think anybody saw that path coming. I do think it was coming for him at some point, but not that rocket ship of a path. But it was fun to watch him pitch in the big leagues, and it's good for him to get that experience, get his feet wet, pitch in some meaningful baseball games. And then as he goes down the road, I think his ability to execute his pitches at certain areas of the strike zone will be a big piece for him. He pitches really well with the fastball at the top for the most part. Mm-hmm. When he's throwing 96 at the top with 20 inches of ride, and it's a ball to black at the top of the zone, good luck. But his ability to get those off-speed pitches to, the optimal parts of the strike zone, I think will be a big piece for him moving forward. And then, I say optimal parts of the strike zone, but even out of the strike zone. I know there was some moments where it's maybe he's throwing too many strikes and we need to force him to leave the zone, whether that's 2K or non-2K. But you know how it is when, a hitter goes up there and knows the guy's going to be in the zone a bunch. They're a little bit more ready to swing. So I think that'll be a big piece for him. And then his changeup as well, I think would be a big piece for him. I think lefties presented some challenges for him, and he, I think, improved the changeup as the year went. I know they made some changes toward the end of the big league season, and it seemed like the movement was better. I think the issue with the changeup for him is he didn't have to throw it in the minor leagues to get guys out, so he didn't have to. He wasn't forced to work on it a ton. So I think the shape was a little bit better. His feel for it was better, but getting that consistent shape and developing some trust and confidence in it, I think will be a big piece for him as if he wants to be a big league starter.
So I got to do a quick follow up there because, we've ordered questions on these guys as like Zebby and Mars together, right? Because they're both what you might kind of deem like more elite strike throwers, right? They can throw strikes for days. Something I'm really curious about is you mentioned getting a guy to leave the zone more and knowing that you're probably going to need to do that more at the big league level to generate more miss and get chase, right? How do you think about that as a pitching coach at a lower level like high A, and kind of balance introducing a guy to that when he can just throw a strike and be nasty enough to beat a hitter that's not as good as a major league hitter, right? Is the right move, let me get you to try and leave the zone now because it'll give you a longer runway to do that. Or if you can beat someone in the zone, beat them in the zone, that's the next guy's problem at AA or AAA.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's the ultimate challenge, and I think that's something that we have has been frequent conversations this offseason is how do we better prepare those guys for when they do need to do that. And I think the tough part is none of us could really see it coming. The underlying metrics are maybe there, like maybe he's not executing his off-speed pitches to the perfect locations, but he's still punching out 33% in AA. So the old saying of if it's not broke, don't fix it. You don't want to force him into something he doesn't need to do, whether that's Zebby or anybody for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's introducing it as they get up to higher levels. At the lower levels, you want to make sure that they're competing in the strike zone, right? And for us, that's something we tend to do a good job of. One, because it seems like most of the guys that we draft have a very high command skill.
Mm-hmm.
And then we feel like, our philosophy and our approach to it at the minor league level, maybe puts guys in the right mind frame to just compete in the strike zone, whether that's, less than 2 strikes or 2 strikes or whatever. But yeah, maybe introducing, some pieces of that as they move into AA or AAA, and whether that's leaving the zone more 2K or it's, getting to optimal parts of the strike zone, non 2K, whatever that is. I think the ultimate challenge of it is figuring out for that specific guy, them figuring out what those pitches look like, right? What does my 2-strike slider need to look like? How long does it need to hold the zone?
Mm-hmm.
What can I throw it off of? Because there's obviously chase pitches and there's waste pitches, right? There are pitches that are 2 balls off and there are pitches that are 6 balls off. So them learning this is where I got to start this if I want it off the plate and to get a miss, not just off the plate, right? So yeah, I think that it's a challenging piece, but something that we have thought a lot about here in the last couple months.
Yeah. So as we talked about Zebby, and I mean, not only was he not walking anybody, right, and so he's getting Baseball America tweeting about him, and he's got a name like Zebby, so you see it on your timeline, you don't miss it. Andrew Morris has a pretty plain name, right? and he's been young at his level. He's always performed well, and no matter what, I mean, whether it was Corey Lewis the year before or Zebby this year, like he's kind of flown under the radar, but his numbers have been really, really good. And so, how do we view him? Does he? I mean, now he's at AAA with not really a lot of fanfare. I mean, Jamie's been talking about him for a while. There's some other fans of him, but it just hasn't been as loud as everybody else.
Yeah.
How does he progress now as kind of young for AAA, kind of having flown under the radar and being just a step from the big leagues?
Yeah, it's actually, like you said, if Zebby's not there, this is probably the most talked about guy, as far as having a really solid year last year. I think next steps for Andrew, continuing to, execute it's similar to Zebby, right? Like he throws a ton of strikes. He strikes enough guys out. It's getting the pitches to optimal parts of the strike zone. And, at a younger age, he does have a little bit of time to figure that out. Right. But I think what you get with Andrew is he is a dog on the mound. He is probably one of the best at just competing in the moment and wanting to beat the guy across from him. And I think it, regardless of what his stuff looks like that day, you kind of trust that he's going to figure it out. So I think as he, works through this next year in AAA or the big leagues or wherever he ends up, I think it'll be figuring out how his arsenal plays, right? He wasn't in AAA for a ton of time. Figuring out, the exact ways he needs to get hitters out, whether that's righties or lefties or whatever, what you might have it, but understanding, how, like I said, how his pitches are going to play. He only punched out 19% in his short time in AAA. maybe there are some adjustments we need to make to try to get him to 30% or whatever it is. But I think time will tell as he goes, because even if you look at from last year to this year, he only punched out, I think, 17% in high A last year. Came back with a slightly different arsenal. We added a cutter and the slider was a tick depthier, but outside of that, the arsenal was pretty similar, and he punched way more guys out in Cedar Rapids, punched more guys out in AA than he did in Cedar Rapids the year before, and then obviously made his way up to AAA. But I think that's maybe a piece of his numbers is, he wants to strike guys out. Everybody does, but you even look at his FIP or his ERA or whatever. He's just not letting guys score because he competes his butt off. He gets in there and he's competing with that guy in the box. So sometimes the underlying numbers might not jump off the page, and maybe that's why he flies under the radar a little bit more. But he puts up zeros, and in the big leagues, that's what you want. So,
yeah, 258 FIB across all the levels he was at in 2024. Okay, next guy I want to ask you about. So we've done the two guys that err more on the side of kind of strike throwing, and I think there's the next pair is like slightly less so, but not necessarily in a detrimental way, right? Just as a characteristic of their pitching. CJ Culpepper, one thing I'm curious to ask you about, he presents a really interesting look to me on the mound. Really short arm action, seemingly really short stride. That looks a little bit uncomfortable if I was a hitter, right? Because it just seems like an unusual look, but he missed some time at the beginning of the season. I think spent some time at Cedar Rapids before finishing strong at AA, 284 FIP, struck out just south of 27% of guys. How did you assess his 2024 and what do you see coming up for him in terms of areas of focus in 2025?
Yeah, I think on the outside looking in, you maybe think it's a little disappointing just because he didn't pitch as much as you would maybe hope. When we saw him in spring training, he looked the best I've seen him since he's been with Twins. He looked like a no doubt big leaguer. And I've seen him at those. He's flashed those at times, right? He's flashed that look at times. I think the biggest piece for CJ this year was just figuring out how his pitches played and how we needed to sequence his pitches. He has 6 pitches. They all move quite a bit. So understanding how they were going to play off each other, which ones, whether we're tweaking usages to righties or lefties, whatever it was, we felt like we hit on that right before his injury. He had 1 or 2 outings there that his strikeout percentage went up. Felt like we were starting to get the ball rolling a little bit on the usage front, and then obviously the injury happens and it takes a little bit of time to get back from that. But then when he came back, he seemed like he hadn't skipped a beat from that. So and I know that AA takes a little time to adjust for everybody, but if you look at his last couple outings in AA, finished the season really strong. So I think that was the biggest piece, especially for those guys that are he's another 2 fastball guy with a ton of off-speed pitches. So guys that are like that Sonny Gray type, Marcus Stroman type, those guys are feel guys. So it takes a little bit of time to figure out how your stuff plays and where you need to put it. So I think once he figured that out, it was pretty eye-opening for everybody. I think it was really encouraging, and looking forward to CJ's future and how he develops.
I got to ask about Corey Lewis last year when we were here. I mean, he was the guy coming off the huge year, right? Starts the year off with a little bit of a shoulder thing. Spends I think more downtime than us fans anticipated. Comes back, makes it to AAA, I think, for maybe 1 start. So what are the hurdles here? Lot of strikeouts, less strikes, more walks. His fastball velo was down. Has that knuckleball. So what are the hurdles for him this year in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on it there. I think the obvious one is fastball velo. He needs to throw harder, and he does have. He throws from a very unique slot. He gets into some really unique positions, but that allows him to get a lot of miss. But it does, it can for some guys make it harder to throw harder, right? Because you're in these unique positions that are maybe stressing the body a bit more. So his ability to continue to push fastball velo, and then like you said, he does need to do a better job competing in the strike zone. I think if you watch him, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a lot of times he's missing above the zone, and a lot of times that benefits him. He gets a ton of swing and miss above the strike zone, especially on his fastball. And I know that was a piece we talked about when he was in Cedar Rapids the year before, was getting his fastball on the strike zone more, but the more he just lived at the top rail, the more miss he got on it. So he is outside the zone a bit more. He does get away with it a bit more than some guys, I think, because he does, for the most part, miss in the right places. But yeah, I think the fastball velo piece is the obvious, hey, he needs to do this. But I do think, after the injury, he did have a really encouraging year. Like you said, 30% K rate in AA. That's, those guys aren't, not everybody's doing that. So that's, super encouraging once he was back healthy.
Okay, now we're going to transition away from your graduates, and I do want to just kind of name this before to give you a break from speaking here, Jonas, before we jump into some other guys. I do think like the 2022 draft class has maybe overshadowed some of the guys that are newer to the org a little bit, and so we want to spend some time spotlighting some of these guys, right, who are newer, who were at Cedar Rapids mostly at the end of the year. Before we do that, speaking of high K rates, there's a particular guy that we got to ask you about here. So we're going to dig in some additional guys that you spent time with last season. And again, just kind of ask, what were your thoughts, strengths, areas of growth, outlook for 2025? It would be hard to not start with Connor Prielipp. I had 3, 4, 5 people message me to specifically say, you're going to ask him about Connor Prielipp, right? Obviously, coming back from significant injury, maybe it's not too much hyperbole to say kind of learning how to pitch again, right? After such a lengthy layoff, obviously very carefully managed in terms of load. But despite that, 2.95 ERA, 1.02 FIP, a K rate over 42%, walking only 8% of guys, 67% strikes. Just from taking a look at some of the pitches, fastball looked solid, slider looked devastating, changeup maybe not getting the love that it deserves. And so I'm just going to stop talking and let you let us know what you thought, because I think Twins fans are really excited, right? Obviously, he was a higher draft pick. Left-handed pitchers always kind of intriguing. Obviously, there have been some challenges staying on the field, but I think folks are excited about the stuff and the potential, and certainly the dominant start he got off to at Cedar Rapids have people talking. Yeah,
for sure. I've never coached in the big leagues. I haven't been in professional baseball long enough, but man, if I thought what a big league arm looked like, that's what I would think it looked like. It's like you said, the slider's devastating. The changeup, to your point, doesn't get the love it deserves because the slider's disgusting. And then, he casually throws in that heater. The crazy thing about all of it is it all looks so effortless. He gets on the mound and doesn't look like he's trying, and it's 4-7 and nobody's touching him. But I think you hit the hammer or the nail on the head right away with the learning how to pitch. I think we saw that in his short time in Cedar Rapids, specifically like second time through the order. First time through, he seemed to cruise most of the time. Mm-hmm. But then second time, I think guys, had a little bit better idea what he was trying to do. Like I said, just understanding what he needs to do to get guys out, or what he needs to do to keep guys guessing and just not be predictable. He just hasn't pitched a lot, over his career. So getting some more innings under his belt will be a massive piece. But I think Twins territory should be excited about the future of Connor Prielipp. He was really fun to watch and a really good guy.
So I gotta ask a follow-up there, because you said something that I was curious about. Actually, something I wondered about a little bit with David Festa, watching flashes of him being dominant at the major league level also. And you mentioned second time through, keeping guys guessing. Maybe it's an incorrect assumption, right, to assume that that's more difficult for a guy who's relying heavily on 3 pitches. Is there a world in which Prielipp adds a 4th pitch to the arsenal somewhere down the line? Obviously, when you're coming back from a major injury, that's probably not the focus, right? You just want to get a guy throwing and staying on the field and all that good stuff. But curious if you see that as a possibility.
Yeah, I think if he does, it's maybe, later down the road. It's probably outside my jurisdiction to say, but I think you see how the Arsenal plays, as he moves up, and then see what his role is going to be. If he, everybody wants to believe, he's going to be a big league starter, and I hope he is. I don't know if he is or not. But if he ends up being a big league bullpen guy, 3 pitches will be plenty. That slider will be devastating out of the bullpen. And as a starter, maybe there's, some options to, add a curveball or something of that nature. I know Connor had asked during the year about adding a curveball, and we had talked about, just, rolling with the arsenal he has now. So yeah, like I said, that's probably not my place to speak on, but I could see him at some point adding a 4th pitch if it was something that was, we felt could help him be a big league starter.
Right on. All right, Jeremy, I know you've been waiting on this one.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of Connor Prielipp talk that I want to have. But I'm gonna keep going because I think I could ask questions all night. Anyway, Tanner Hall. So I was a big fan of him when the Twins drafted him. His changeup was great. I figured that the velo would be added because that's just what the Twins do. It seems like with all their guys. But he's struggled so far. So 5.40 ERA last year, 3.83 xFIP. Had a decent number of strikeouts. Didn't walk a ton. More of an East-West guy, but didn't have maybe the success that we were hoping he would have. How do you view him going forward?
Yeah, I think Tanner did had an up and down year. I think at the start of the year, a lot of his development was, trying to get the slider right. The slider was fairly inconsistent in spring training, so trying to get it to the movement profile that we wanted. And without the slider, he is, essentially a 2-pitch guy, sinker, changeup. So that was a big piece I could see leading to some, inconsistencies. And then, as you noted, he needs to throw harder. And I think as an org, we know that. I think Tanner knows that. Hopefully, this offseason gives us some time to really hone in on that and hopefully make some encouraging pushes to adding some velocity. I think if he adds velocity, it's night and day different. Like you said, the changeup's real, the sinker's real, the slider was much more consistent toward the end, but it's hard to throw 88 to 91 in pro ball and have a lot of success. And I think for being 88 to 91 as a starter in pro ball, I think he had a pretty good year. I think he pitched either as you would expect or better, with that at that velocity range. So, adding, like I said, adding the velo will be the big piece for Tanner. And I think you can be encouraged by the other attributes that he brings to the table, assuming that we can add that velocity.
Yeah. So interesting looking at his pitch break chart and how side to side, how east-west it is instead of north-south. I have not seen a ton that kind of stretch that far either way with so little up and down. It's cool. Okay, gotta ask. Okay, we're gonna dig into a couple of 2023s here, who had a good amount of success with you guys. Ty Langenberg is a guy we're gonna start with here. University of Iowa guy, right? So localish. Had a really strong year with you guys. This across all levels, 297 FIP, struck out north of 25% of guys, only walking around 6% of guys. Looks like 5 pitches. Tell folks a little bit about kind of what he's throwing, how he looked in 2024. And I'm specifically thinking for the next 3 guys, Jonas, they might be prospects or pitchers who fans have seen a little bit less of. So tell us a little bit about Ty Langenberg and what you saw in 2024.
Yeah. Ty had a really solid rookie year. He's really smart. He works really hard. Being from Iowa, they do a really nice job on the pitching side. So he was pretty well educated in a lot of the stuff. I think we saw, some inconsistencies in his velocity. I think if you look at some of his numbers in April, he's touching some 6s. And then I think if you look at some numbers in May, he's, sitting more around 91 to 92, maybe touching a 4. But I felt like we saw, when the outings he was throwing harder, were really encouraging. He got a little bit more miss. The stuff played up at the top of the zone just a little bit better. So I think he's a really, really encouraging piece as we, try to hone in those velocity, just making it a little bit more consistent. Because I do think, we saw it again in August. There were some velocity ticks again. So he's a long levered guy, and there's a lot of moving pieces in the delivery. So making sure everything is synced up and he's moving the way that he needs to move in order to throw at his best, I think is a big piece for him. And it sounds redundant. Velocity is just such a massive piece in our game, and it allows everything else to play better. If you throw harder, everything's better. So, if he can sit 94 and, instead of sitting 92, I think he's in a much better spot. And he already had a really good year. We're talking about Zebby. We're talking about Corey, CJ, Andrew. I mean, outside of Corey, he had a better year in high A than all of those guys. So I think his future is, and that's not a knock on those guys at all. It's just to say that, Ty had a really solid rookie season. I think we should be really excited for what the future for him looks like.
Amen. All right, another guy that had a really good year at Cedar Rapids, Spencer Bengard. So just numbers wise, 151 ERA, 265 FIP, 22% K, 4.3 walk, close to 70% strikes, but appeared a lot in relief. So is that, is he a relief pitcher moving forward, or just too many other guys in front of him that he gets that opportunity maybe to start now? What do we need to know about him?
Yeah, I think time will tell. I think we were pretty crowded with starters by the end of the Cedar Rapids season. So when he came in relief, it was usually longer relief or what we would call like a piggyback situation. Mm-hmm. I think Spencer is an interesting guy. He has a lot of his own thoughts, and a lot of them are good. But he really takes ownership of his career. He has the right mindset that you want out of your pitchers, right? He gets up there and he thinks his stuff doesn't stink, and that is what you want, right? He gets on the mound and he has all the confidence in the world that he's going to get that guy out, whether he has his best stuff that day or not. So I'm encouraged for Spencer's future. He is another guy that needs to throw a little harder, but he does throw a ton of strikes. The arsenal is really interesting. The changeup that he progressed to toward the end of the year was really interesting. So I think, he's got a bright future as long as the velo continues to take and he continues to work hard. I think he needs to, spend a little bit more time in the weight room this offseason. We can clean up some of the movements and get a little bit stronger in certain positions and maybe move a little bit faster. But as he cleans those things up, I think he has a really bright future.
So question, Jonas, like a follow-up there, because, we've talked or heard you speak a good amount on guys that either have had success in adding velocity or guys that might need to if they're going to thrive as they continue to move up levels. And you don't have to answer this one if you don't want to. I'm just curious, kind of at the minor league level, how does the work in terms of adding velocity, how much of that lives with like pitching coach versus like biomechanics input department, stuff like that? Or is that kind of a group effort, varying by prospect as to kind of how you approach doing that work?
Yeah, definitely a group effort. Yeah. Everybody is involved in those conversations, whether it's our coordinator group, our pitching coaches, our biomechanics department. We've done a nice job filling, we have a big league biomechanist, but we've filled some roles in the minor league side as well. So, everybody has pieces of that pie and are contributing. I think it, obviously in the off season, or even you want to say January, the training is going to look a bit different than it is in season, right? You can't have as much high intensity work during the season as you can in the off season. Mm-hmm. So I think during the season, a lot of that stuff does fall back to some of the biomechanics things, honing in some pieces of the delivery. I think a lot of that is contributed to, I think Ty's ups and downs with velocity throughout the year. Up and down has a negative connotation, but I think the ups were encouraging because it could have just went down. But he did some things, everybody contributed some ideas that we thought could maybe help in his delivery that eventually, clicked with him. So, so the biomechanist piece, the biomechanics piece, especially in season, we've seen, I would say, more this year than the year before. We saw that have a bigger impact. And I felt like we did a better job applying it to guys this year as well. Just making some small, however small they are, but incremental velo jumps during the season. You'll take anything you can get.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so one other guy I want to ask you about who numbers just popped for me, and I feel like we've just done a really bad job of spotlighting how good he was, right? So this is another guy who worked pretty much exclusively in relief, I think. Nolan Santos, just both some interesting kind of productivity and then also some interesting pitch characteristics. Good numbers, 248 FIP, struck out 28% of guys. Maybe a little light on the strike throwing from what you might want to see. Looks like a ton of vertical break on the fastball, and looks like he can really spin it too. Curious for your kind of breakdown of his pitches, and again that relief role maybe paired with the fact that he doesn't throw as many strikes as some of the other guys. But curious what you made of him in his 2024 season.
Yeah, Nolan, again, another really solid rookie year. I think he started in spring training. We were working, I shouldn't say we because I wasn't a part of a lot of it, but as an org, we're working toward improving his slider. And then, we shifted to some of his other pitches. So throughout the year, he spent a lot of time on arsenal development, and I shouldn't say very few time on command work, but that was not his number one priority. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you saw some of the walk rates maybe a little bit higher than normal, or not than normal, but then you would like, but obviously the K rate's still there. I think the stuff ultimately for him will be a big piece. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he sat 92 out of the pen. We gotta, if you're going to be a big league bullpen arm, we got to continue to push the velo up like we've talked about for all these guys. But his stuff is really interesting. He throws from a really high slot. He spins the heck out of it. And he's a really fiery competitor. We used him mainly in the closer role in Cedar Rapids because of his mindset and his attitude toward that. And his stuff is good. He's got swing and miss stuff. I think giving him some time to pitch in the strike zone with, this newly acquired stuff that he has, his newly acquired arsenal. And then I think he'll be just fine. He worked hard. And like I said, he's a really fiery competitor. And, so hopefully as he gets more comfortable with that stuff, that kind of carries over. But
love it.
I got to ask a question. And so I'm asking it's a pretty general question, but I'm thinking of a couple specific guys when I ask this question. So when you look at when guys come back in the spring and kind of look at what they've done, where they're going, and I'm thinking guys right now like Connor Prielipp from this past year to next year, guys in the past like Marco Raya, because we've talked about Marco Raya a ton. And
so much.
Yeah, and we probably have. And it's been the great debate about how he's been handled, because he doesn't get the opportunities to go through the order a ton, right? It's been very handled with kid gloves. And then my side of the argument is the guy just turned 22 and he's at AAA. So it can't be like, we can be critical on how this has been handled, but at the same time, it's something that seems to have worked. I mean, one start in AAA, and it was a good start in AAA. And I'm looking at Connor Prielipp's pitch log from this year. He never broke 50 pitches, right? But yet he still had 8 or more swings and misses in his last 6 starts. And so when you think about, and I'm not saying, how are you going to handle Connor Prielipp, because I think we'll get to see that play out, right? We want to be healthy first. But when you look at guys that have had injuries in the past, is it like a month by month thing, or let's look at, we'll go start by start, like how much, and like with that last question, like there's a big group of people. How much is this all like a big group of people getting together and looking at, the single player and trying to come up with the best development plan? Are there pitch limits? Are there innings limits? Are there, how much? I mean, I feel like there's a ton of thought that goes into it, and you don't have to share, the secrets, but I'm really curious on how this all works.
No, I think you're spot on with a lot of that. It's all hands on deck in those cases, right? I think, your health is the most important piece. And then, as you mentioned with Marco, I can't speak to his specific situation, but when you have guys that have maybe had a little bit of an injury history and are young, and they have so much time to figure it out, it's much. I know it can be frustrating, maybe from a fan perspective, or even from Marco's perspective, right? He's the one who's maybe having a good 3-inning outings, and he has to continue to do that over and over and over, and he doesn't get to pitch 5 innings or 6 innings like he wants to. I think just making sure that you're handling that correctly, because we see most arm injuries in baseball are during build-up periods when you're, if you aren't handling those correctly or taking enough time to do that. Now, you can say maybe at times we were a little bit overly cautious with him, but I think to your point, he's 22 and he's in AAA already, and he's already had a good outing in AAA, and I think it allowed him to figure out some problems in AA last year, and then solve those solutions as he moved into this year. And Marco always wants the ball, so he's always frustrated when he gets pulled, whether it's the 6th inning or the 3rd inning. But I think we saw toward the end of the year there, it's the innings limit starts to get bumped up a little bit as he got a little bit more efficient. And sometimes it's less about innings and more about pitch count per inning and some of those things. If he's throwing 50 pitches in 2 innings, or he's throwing 50 pitches across 5, that's a lot different. So just navigating those and wanting to be careful with guys. I don't know how we'll handle Connor in the future. I'm sure we will do what we think is in Connor's best interest with all our departments input and collaboration, and make sure that Connor stays healthy and has a chance to be the best version of himself. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I'm sure I'll be there to help manage it.
Love it. All right, Jonas, one more, and then we'll get you on your way here. Because we kind of put together a list of guys who we wanted to check in and hear your thoughts about, but also want to give you the opportunity to tell us who was flying under the radar in terms of pitching prospects in the organization, because I feel like there are guys who, we do our best. We don't give enough shine to, whether that's like Travis Adams or, guys who have just like quietly made their way up the ladder who we're not talking about enough, or, guys that you finished the year with at Cedar Rapids. Is there anyone kind of under the radar who Twins fans should be watching out for in 2025?
Yeah. 2 guys that come to mind, specifically Christian McLeod, who I actually mentioned on last year's podcast. But if you look at his numbers this year, I think you probably look at it kind of similar to Corey Lewis's performance, where the strikeout numbers are high, the walk rates are maybe a little bit higher than you'd like, the velo isn't quite as high as you'd like it to be, but the profile's pretty unique. And he just seems to give hitters fits. So you never want to compare guys to Hall of Famers, but it's a very Clayton Kershaw-esque profile. He hides the ball behind his head, and it gets on you. It's an uncomfortable game of catch, I'll tell you that. So he would be my number one. He punched out 27% across 2 levels. He did pitch in St. Paul one outing, and I think I don't know how, I can't remember exactly how the outing went, but I do believe he punched out a decent amount in that outing as well. So, continuing to push him into the strike zone more will be a big piece, and trying to add a little bit of velo. But I think we saw this year how electric the stuff can be, and how electric it could really be if he is throwing just a tick harder, like I've said with a lot of these guys. But he's got a lot of college pedigree, right, from a big program. Has pitched a lot in the past, has pitched in some really big games, and he's very comfortable in who he is, and he knows who he is as a pitcher. I think he just needs to continue to add that velo, and he's on year 2 off of Tommy John, so just making sure we're doing that safely, I think. And then the second guy would be Ricky Castro. So Ricky was a free agent sign out of Tulane after spring training, I believe. If not, it was right at the end, and I didn't see him. But he had a really nice year in low A. He got up to us, I believe, in July. I could be wrong there. It could have been August. But very, really interesting profile. Pretty similar to, a lot of these North-South guys that we're talking about, whether it's Andrew or Corey or Nolan Santos or whoever it is. Pretty true North-South profile. Spins it pretty well. I know we took some time to we were trying to add an additional pitch toward the end of the year. And I know a lot of his work in Fort Myers was on his curveball, trying to throw that a little bit harder. When he came to us, the slider curveball combo was a little different. It was like a slurpy type. So I'm just trying to hone in his arsenal a bit. But as he got more comfortable, he was really fun to watch. I think he's going to have some really electric stuff as he gets moving here. I think there's some areas in his delivery that we can optimize a bit better. He stands really, really tall. If you've ever seen Andrew pitch, it's honestly kind of similar to the lower half that Andrew has, where it's very little load, but he gets down the mound pretty quickly. So maybe just trying to optimize some pieces in his delivery a bit more. But I think he could be really special here moving forward, and a guy that could potentially be on some prospect lists, in the next year or two if things fall his way.
Love that. We got to figure out how to identify the people responsible for Twins and undrafted free agent signings, because it is a treasure trove of interesting
deals, right?
Yeah. McCusker.
Another one that, McCusker. Yep. Another one that would be an underrated guy we haven't discussed, and probably because he's a reliever, was Kyle Bischoff. Had a really great year for us. Good year for us in CR, good year for us in Wichita. Ended up in St. Paul by the end of the year. I think he only had 1 or 2 outings in St. Paul, but so early in the year struggled a bit to get in the zone. He was low 90s last year, maybe to mid-ish. Came out first outing in Beloit, and it is 40 degrees at 9 o'clock at night, and he is pumping 96 to 98. And I'm like, where did this guy come from?
Yeah, there you go.
But he, eventually honed in the zone a bit more. The slider, we made some tweaks to the slider. The slider's real. He has a low release, so the fastball profile, if you look at it just like on a plot, isn't super interesting, but low release height, so he's able to pitch at the top of the zone at pretty low BAA. So if he can continue to compete in the strike zone and maybe hone in the changeup just a bit more, I could see Kyle, pushing, knocking on the door for the big leagues here within the year. He's a very impressive person and pitcher.
I love that you said that one, because I put him on a most likely to contribute to the big league bullpen from St. Paul guys list. So You're backing on my shout. Love it. Jonas, thanks so much for your time. We always really appreciate it. We'd like to keep you busy during the off season, so anytime you want to come back and talk pitching some more, we'd be glad to have you back, and we really appreciate it, man. Hope the rest of your winter and spring go well, and except for the Wisconsin game, hope Nebraska football have a good end of their year.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for all the coverage. I know the guys, especially guys that aren't on high prospect lists, they always just give them a little bit of something to know that someone out there is, sees them and sees what they're doing. It's a long season, so to get a little recognition wherever you can get it is always good. And just wanted to give a shout out to my co-pitching coach in Cedar Rapids, AJ Angulo. Had a really awesome year with him. Had a great time. This has been one of my favorite coworkers to ever work with, and allowed me to do things within my job that I maybe otherwise wouldn't have been able to do if he wasn't there. So really appreciate him throughout the year, made the year much easier, and looking forward to his future within the org. He's a really good coach, and is going to be a good contributor to the org here in the future.
Love it. We'll have to, Jeremy, write it down. We got another future guest lined up there. Maybe we'll try and get you guys on at the same time.
There you
can tell stories about each other. All right, we'll be back for another episode next week. Until then, enjoy the rest of the World Series. We'll catch you next time.